Cell phone video and body cameras have fundamentally changed the way we see stops by police. Sometimes they expose wrongdoing by officers. Other times they show cops tried their best. Tonight, a view you've likely never seen before. The News 4 I-team is taking you inside a rough traffic stop. The NYPD pulling over and arresting a young black man in Harlem. Based on one video, you might be tempted to jump to conclusions. But as News 4's Erica Byfield discovered, after wading through nearly 20 videos of the same incident, some stops are not black and white.
Sit in the car! Sit in the car!
The video is harrowing.
Why are you reaching for your gun?
Shot from the back seat of a car in Harlem.
Put your hands down, bro!
5 friends surrounded by NYPD officers.
Why are you here right there for? Reach for your taser.
Eric Holloway, who works as a youth counselor for the city's Administration of Children's Services, is behind the wheel.
Oh, what's the problem?
He gave us this video because he says this stop is about to spiral out of control.
I don't know. I think we might get arrested. I don't know.
I was never an aggressor. I never did anything that should have resulted in me getting injured.
I'm not doing nothing, bro.
But the video Eric gave us isn't the only record of what happened that night. We've obtained video from 19 other cameras, mostly police body cams. Together, they provide a rare picture of what can happen during a traffic stop involving a young black man, how it can go wrong in ways you might not expect.
You want to get out? Nah, I get you out. I get you out.
Yo, bro, what are you doing, bro? What are y'all doing, bro? What are y'all doing, bro?
To understand how this went down on the morning of June 7th in East Harlem and how Eric says he was injured, you have to rewind to the beginning. It was the last night of the curfew.
It was just a regular stop, you know, license registration.
Eric had 4 friends in the car, including one he'd just picked up. He told officers he was taking them home. For a young black man with no criminal record, it was a painfully familiar routine.
Probably get stopped twice a week, 3 times a week. Since 2020 has started, well over 15, 20 times, I guess.
Roll down your window.
The reason for this stop, a mystery to Eric.
Everybody put their hands up. I asked him, could you at least tell me what I'm being pulled over for? And I never got an answer.
Minutes tick by, more police arrive.
You're not coming out of the vehicle. Keep your hands on the dashboard.
Let's hit pause here for just a moment because how you see what happens next, that is going to depend on your point of view. 2 top experts, Bill Chapman was a chief of patrol and deputy commissioner of training for the NYPD. On the other hand, Vincent Sutherland, he is the executive director for the Center of Race, Inequality, and the Law at NYU.
Everyone in the car is fearful about why it is they're being stopped.
Telling him why he was stopped really wasn't mandatory.
It seems like all the de-escalation training went out the window.
I think the tactics were excellent. There would not have been any injury to the driver had he not offered such severe resistance.
I'm getting out the vehicle.
You're not coming out the vehicle, brother.
I'm getting out the vehicle.
I'll tell you like I'm out the vehicle.
You're not coming out the vehicle, right? My vehicle.
I'll tell you like I'm out the vehicle.
What the police didn't tell Eric is that they pulled him over because they wanted the friend that he'd picked up minutes before.
You saw the guy jump out of the car?
Yeah, I saw him when he walked out. Where's Brown?
What's up?
Got a hat? Yeah, red. Yeah, that's him.
That's him?
Yep.
All right, pull him out. No doubt. Step out. Step out. Yeah. It's okay. No problem. No problem.
That man matched the description of someone who was involved in a car accident and fled the scene, which he never told Eric.
All I know and recall is that he had got into a situation that he needed a ride home.
I'm getting out of my car.
As soon as he was, you know, taken out of the vehicle, that's when I decided to try to also get up because me being a driver, I felt like it was my responsibility.
I'm getting out of my vehicle.
Multiple angles of this moment provide a more complete picture. Eric admits he disobeyed orders from officers and actually climbed halfway out of his window before being pulled out.
You want to get out? Nah, I'll get you out.
Seems black and white, right?
Yo, they pulling Eric out the car.
Being resistant and ignoring the officers, he created a situation that didn't need to exist.
What I saw was just completely unnecessary brutality.
People are entitled to their opinions, but the officers did nothing inappropriate.
The reality is that far too often we've seen people who comply with the police, comply with every single command that the police have given, and still end up losing their life. I mean, let's not forget that George Floyd, who was completely compliant with the police officers, was laying on his stomach in handcuffs
In fact, George Floyd was on everyone's mind when this happened. The 9 minutes that he laid on the ground as an officer knelt on his neck. Black Lives Matter protests were sweeping through the city.
Just because of the way that the world is moving at the time of this,
No justice! No peace!
I did not feel safe inside my vehicle.
What are y'all doing, bro? I'm not even doing nothing, bro. I got him.
But back outside his vehicle, it only got worse. Police say Eric resisted arrest. He says the cops roughed him up and injured his arm.
In my head, I'm telling myself, don't do nothing out of the ordinary to get yourself shot or something.
In the aftermath of Eric's arrest, chaos. A woman who tried to help Eric got tackled. A man filming from the sidewalk was accused of bumping a cop. Both detained, neither charged. Meanwhile, the women in the car confused about what to do.
Sir?
Don't say nothing, bro.
Is it okay if we get out?
In so many different ways, this could have ended in a situation that didn't have to result in the type of violence that we saw on that tape.
The need for better communication is one thing that our experts agree on.
In a perfect world, the officer would state exactly what's wrong, and the person who is the subject of that communication would understand.
What am I getting arrested for?
But like so many of these situations, we're left with more questions than answers.
What am I getting arrested for? What am I getting arrested for?
I question whether they would have treated a car full of older white people in the same way that they treated the people in that car.
Erica, let's first point out, we live in a world of urgent breaking news and viral video, but you and the team spent weeks, if not months, wading through the 4 hours of this video. You did interviews and re-interviews to get to this point and kind of dissect this. Let me ask you, Mr. Sutherland from NYU said that would this happen to a group of white people riding along? He brings up the issue of race. We must point out a number of the officers in the video were of color.
Yeah, several of them actually, David. The experts don't agree on this either. Sutherland is convinced that he was treated this way, or the group of people in that car were treated that way because they were young and black, while Chapman, on the other hand, thinks that race was not a factor. He specifically pointed out to me that during that interaction, Eric engaged with the primary officer there, and that primary officer was black.
All right, I know you've been on this. What has happened to everyone involved, all the stakeholders in this?
So there were a lot of questions we had. We finally got some answers, not really from the NYPD. They refused our repeated requests for information, but the attorneys involved in this case, they tell us that none of the officers are facing disciplinary action. Meanwhile, the charges against Eric, right now, they are still pending. He has to be in court next month. He was the only one arrested that night. The police originally wanted to talk to another man in that car you saw there. We found out he just got a summons or a ticket for leaving the scene of an accident.
An extraordinary look at what can happen in one incident. Erica Byfield, thank you, and the I-Team. Since the death of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests, a searing light has been shined on police brutality and misconduct. Tonight, we're illuminating the other side, what it's like to be black behind the wheel, what it's like when a car, which for so many is a symbol of independence and success and freedom, is actually a place of fear. Here's News 4's Pat Battle with a story that's an unforgettable ride.
Teddy Vega, come on down. You're the next contestant on The Price is Right.
If you know the game, then you know it's a leap just to make it to that stage. But to take the penultimate ride on The Price is Right is to get this far.
With your brand new car.
I want to show you the first number of the price of the car.
And when those numbers light up, what red-blooded American wouldn't feel what Teddy Vega felt? And on his 18th birthday?
This felt like an eternity, just waiting for that number. And as soon as I felt the pause, the extra pause, I knew I had won the car. Yes! It was a phenomenal experience. Oh my goodness. I still can't believe it actually happened.
It was so surreal, so much joy and excitement, and then reality set in.
His mom was in the audience, her hands shaking, she says, as she signaled that last winning number.
3. How about a 3, please? Yes!
As Teddy dropped to his knees, her heart sank in her chest.
I was like, can we trade it for a hot tub? My 18-year-old Black Latino son does not need a car. And what's going to be the problems that he's going to encounter?
Make no mistake, For red-blooded black Americans, there's a price to pay for getting behind the wheel. Studies, statistics, and surveys all say that black drivers are far more likely to be pulled over than white ones. They're also more likely to have guns pointed at them by police, to be detained, handcuffed, searched, and arrested.
What's the feeling when those lights go on behind you?
Fear, panic. Am I gonna get home today?
Even in broad daylight, driving that Chevy Cruze through his own hometown, the sight of a police car is cause for concern.
Slow down, slow down.
Teji and Seti are brothers. Kari is their first cousin. For him, the fear is paralyzing. He doesn't even want a driver's license. At 20 years old, Mom and Dad still take him everywhere.
When I went to high school, I didn't really have a lot of people who looked like me, but they were all super excited to drive. When they hit the age of 16, they all started practicing, and I just never really had that excitement. And when I was really digging deep about it, I realized it was probably because of the fear of being pulled over and then having my life maybe be taken away.
Don't pull it out. He was trying to get out his ID.
Philando Castile, shot dead in front of a 4-year-old child. Maurice Gordon, shot by a New Jersey state trooper after a traffic stop went sideways. And Tamir Rice, he wasn't even old enough to drive. He was 12 when he was shot. They're just some of the names that haunt these young men.
Because, you never know. And, you can dress as nice as you want and be as, look as proper as you want, and you'll still be seen as something less than a normal person or as a threat just due to the color of your skin.
Listen, our lives are in danger, and that's a shame. It's like Teji said yesterday, I can't take my black off. A cop can take his uniform off, put his gun away, take his badge off, but I can't take my black off.
This anxious mom points to the fact that these 3 are college students, the younger ones, graduates of one of Bergen County's most competitive and prestigious high schools.
I wish I could stamp their GPA on their forehead. I wonder if somebody would respect them differently and look at them differently.
Short of that, there's the talk, something virtually every black parent has had with their children, and it starts young.
I can remember back to 3rd, 4th grade, where, I was going to a birthday party, and my dad, he would say, you guys have to remember who you are. You guys are black men in this country.
Rona and Victor Vega started that lesson early.
My basic instruction is that you guys just have to be a little wiser in terms of how you communicate and not agitate the situation any more than it is.
What's the protocol when a cop pulls up behind you?
Make sure your hands are always in view of the cop.
Turn your phone on, turn your voice recorder on.
Make sure you're announcing what you're about to do before you do it, so they don't assume you're about to make any gestures that you don't have the intentions of.
You pass by a cop, and you gotta be extra careful. Tend to make sure that everything's correct, so that if you do get stopped, there won't be a reason or they can't make up a reason.
Well, this is a constant rehearsal. It's not a chapter that's closed. Killing of George Floyd was another page being turned based on the history of this country.
These 3 are determined to have a voice in that next chapter. They've launched Solidarity Sundays, a bi-monthly Zoom meeting with their peers, parents, and community aimed at sharing, supporting, and strategizing.
My name is Seti Vega, and I wanted to speak to you guys a bit about black economics.
They protested and demonstrated and demanded change.
We've had changes in legislature and changes in the government, and it doesn't change the intent in people's hearts. We were freed, the slaves were freed. That didn't mean they looked at us any differently. We were allowed to go, black people were allowed to go to the same schools as white people, and it didn't really change how they looked at us in those schools.
Processing that truth and their place in this country is a never-ending conversation, but a necessary one for Teji, Seti, and Kari.
In the eyes of almost all Americans, black folks are a threat. In the media, through movies, we're portrayed as, quote-unquote thugs, quote-unquote people who don't have empathy, and that's just not right.
The best way to get them to look is to flood the media that they consume currently with what we're saying, like stuff like this, these kind of interviews, to get them to, I guess, even just look our way. If you change one viewpoint, then maybe that person can change another person's viewpoint, and it's just a trickle-down effect.
I think we'll know that we've really reached a point where this country is not racially prejudiced when young African Americans can not have to worry about wearing a hoodie at night, as where our white counterparts don't feel that same threat. It's the little things that they don't really realize that they have the advantage in where you see the problem. And I think like us trying to explain something like that to them, there's a disparity because they can't feel it.
They just want people to feel, David. And you know, I have a 22-year-old son. I could have interviewed him for this project. I could have talked to him 1,000 times and have 1,000 times over, and have his friends as well. Can't wear a hoodie when he walks the dog at night. We've had the talk with our son, and I know, David, yours is much younger, but I can imagine you've already started.
I've already started. It's a little emotional, actually, to listen to them speak. And, you know, a lot of times, Pat, you've heard this. People say, well, if you comply with law enforcement, everything will be fine, as if those young men don't respect law enforcement. But we've seen occasions when you can, and yet you've done nothing wrong, and an aggressive tone, and it just goes south with young people. That's what we worry about as parents, right?
Exactly.
Not having the processing time to kind of take a breath and step away. And they're extraordinary. It's a little bit emotional, too.
I know it's very emotional doing that story, David. And I got to tell you, so many people wanted to be a part of this conversation. I focused on those kids. I've known them, the oldest one, for a while, peripherally, but I knew that they could bring it to light. And it's so important that we continue to have these conversations based on the reckoning on race that we're currently having in this country. It's really critical that we have them, difficult though they may be. And we appreciate our viewers tuning in and listening to this one.
Yep, and we're going to continue this conversation, Pat. The debrief, which we've had for some time, took a hiatus during the pandemic, but we're back, and we're focusing now on these issues of race and bias. Thank you so much for an extraordinary story.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me.
Tonight, a candid conversation that may be uncomfortable for some, but is necessary for all of us. It's about Black Lives Matter. Since the death of George Floyd, protests about policing and race have been both popular and controversial. The initial diverse support for the movement has dropped off, while the issues raised by his death remain. So I sat down with two New York activists from the front lines to ask about the movement, defund the police, and what happens next. Where are you now when it comes to Black Lives Matter and all of the emotion that you were a part of on the front lines?
I am disheartened, like completely disheartened. I mean, for a while it was cool to be an activist. It was the thing to do. There were a lot of people who were mad, showed up on a global scale, and now we're not having so much of that. Obviously, police brutality is an inflammatory issue, but the conversation didn't really get deep enough for me in the sense that when we're speaking about Black liberation, it doesn't stop at police brutality. It's about Black health, it's about Black wealth, it's about education and representation, and we never got to the meat of the issues. I want to imagine a more just world.
It's especially crushing because Glenn Contav has made this his life's work. Beyond the streets, he fights for these issues through a nonprofit that raises awareness of oppression through technology. It seems violence conflated the issue. People looked at looting, they looked at fires burning. You're often asked to condemn violence, but give us some context and perspective on that.
As little kids, we're taught about the American Revolution and what that meant in terms of a violent means to an end. They get statues. They're considered heroes. But when it's people who are experiencing oppression, when we're making noise and some of us outliers are pursuing other means, the whole movement gets condemned into one box. And it's not as simple as that. So let me pick up by that. Do you think the outliers, as you've defined them, hurt or help the greater cause of Black Lives Matter? I think that the outliers are victims of media portrayal, in a sense that we need a critical mass of people to execute our demands. And because the outliers are being painted as thugs and thieves, it takes away from the movement. Appropriate context needs to be added to this conversation.
And as if on cue, it was at this very moment that a founder of the Black Lives Matter movement in New York, Hawk Newsom, joined our conversation.
What's good, baby? I think that there is a miscategorization of the Black Lives Matter movement. The term Black Lives Matter can be used synonymously with the term civil rights struggle. When Martin Luther King was marching, there were cities burning throughout the 1960s. So what people are saying is, oh, because there are riots, I can't be a part of it. So what they're saying is, I'm divesting from the new civil rights movement.
We know during the debate, the president was asked to denounce the Proud Boys and white supremacists, and his answer was controversial for many. I can see some watching now and says, why doesn't he ask Glenn and Hawk? Do they denounce the looters and those who raided stores and burned things and clashed during the protests. Is that a fair question? And what would your response be?
I understand how people could denounce looters. I understand it. I don't do it. Yes, you have some people who are really frustrated who go out and destroy property. But if we flip this around, right? If we flip this around and white people were suffering what we suffer, do you think things would be as peaceful? When you look at folks who didn't want to wear masks and wanted their barbershops open, they took assault rifles and went to the Capitol, and they were encouraged. They were encouraged by the president. Like, we are peaceful people. We weren't running around lynching people, right? We weren't keeping people out of schools. We weren't forcing people to sit in the back of buses. We didn't chain people up and put them in slavery. But somehow we've become dangerous.
And let me ask you, somewhere along the way, it became an us against them when it comes to police. Defund the police became a catch-all phrase. And people lined up saying, well, if I support Black Lives Matter, that must mean I am anti-cop. In your eyes, what does defund the police mean?
Neighborhoods with the highest crime rates, highest murder rates, have the highest unemployment rates. Take the money from the police and put it into social programs.
If we redistributed that wealth to the people, we wouldn't be looking at this housing crisis. We wouldn't have a healthcare crisis. We wouldn't have an education crisis. Like, the money's there. We just have to switch up how we're spending it.
You're a young black man. Are you anti-cop? What's your interaction with police officers been like? Do you see any goodness in cops? Explain it to people who may be hearing you or open to this conversation for the first time.
So if I'm looking at Trayvon Martin, if I'm looking at Mike Brown, Ahmaud Arbery, the laundry list of people that could have been me, every time I see a police officer and I know that they're empowered by a system that can get them off scot-free, even if it's caught on tape, my murder is caught on tape, I'm terrified.
You are?
Legitimately terrified. I understand the need for security and keeping people safe, but I have problems with a system that empowers people to act without accountability.
So what we're saying is some of these people might have good hearts, but they're playing a part in a racist, oppressive system that needs to be abolished. We understand that there's a need for public safety, and we're proposing different ways to police our communities.
It seems like any solution is going to require people to listen to each other, sides to listen to each other. And that seems elusive these days. You see a world where critics of the police and supporters of the police can come together and really talk this through?
There are white people who have good intentions, but when they're looking at cops, they feel safe. Black people want to feel safe too. We both want the same things, but we don't know how to have a dialogue in this country. People need to listen and understand where we're coming from when we say that we feel unsafe. Because once we get past that, then we can establish systems that work for everybody.
It's worth noting there, Glenn, who you just heard from, is taking innovative steps in that dialogue. He's currently using immersive technology to tell the stories of black people through his nonprofit Movers and Shakers. He also gives TED Talks. He's a postdoctoral fellow at NYU, and it's a good bet that we'll be hearing a lot more from him as Black Lives Matter evolves.